All right, here we are, episode 1, season 1 of my podcast. My name is Liza Whitehurst, and I am a Master of Strategic Communications student at Westminster College here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I love all things organizational health and internal communication and leadership health and human development. And so this podcast is a way for me to talk to leading experts in the field and gain their expertise and share that with you. So today is my very first episode, and I have a very special guest. Her name is Christy Seifert. She is my professor at Westminster in the graduate program, but she's also an undergraduate professor at Westminster as well. She has a PhD in English with specializations in rhetoric and professional writing. She's written 4 books and has also written for a number of different journals, blogs, Medium, you name it, she's done it. So thank you for being on the podcast, Christy.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm especially excited to be your first guest.
You should be. So because of your expertise as a professor, well, first, how long have you been a professor? I don't even think I know this.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about this a couple of days ago because I started teaching college my first year of graduate school. So
Wow.
I have been teaching college since, and this date is like, I think it'll shock you, since 1997.
Wow.
I hope it shocks you. I hope you did.
It does. It shocks.
I would have thought it was 1972. So yeah, since 1997, I have been at Westminster since 2005. And I had a job I taught English at Salt Lake Community College for 2 years before that. So I've been teaching full time since 2003.
Nice. Okay. Well, that's great to know because the topic of conversation today is all things Gen Z. And you, now that we know that, you've had quite the experience with the millennial generation, working with them, and now the Gen Z generation. And so just with all the nuances that come with this generation, I thought it would be really helpful for people in business, leaders, people who are hiring, people who are a colleague and a coworker, to just learn the ins and outs, what makes Gen Z special, what makes them unique. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, I would love for you to give me and the listeners just a brief overview of Gen Z. You've done this with me. You kind of shared this with me a while back, and it really gave me a fresh perspective about the world that they've only known and what they've grown up in. So do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was fortunate enough to get some sort of background and instruction at Westminster, where we had some training thinking about what our Gen Z students need and expect and want. That's very different from our millennial students. And I think that a lot of times people conflate millennials and Gen Z, but it is 2 very different generations. And I'll talk a little bit about how you define them. But I just want to first say that I recognize that I'm talking in generalities here. So there's always going to be somebody who says, I was born in those years and I don't feel that way at all. That's of course always true. I mean, we're looking at trends of a generation. So it's going to be different depending on who you are. But these are things that are coming out of the research that we can say are prominent for Gen Z that is different from the millennial generation and then from my generation, which is Gen X. So Gen Z, some people define the generation differently, but it's generally, the definition is born between 1995 and 2012. So if you do the math quickly in your head, it's between the ages of 9 and 26 years old. So that's a pretty big generation. Like a 26-year-old and a 9-year-old are, going to have, different experiences of the world. And I would say even like a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old starting college is very different from a 22-year-old. But we're looking at this kind of swath of cultural history that happened in those years. So if you're thinking numbers, that's 68 million Americans. So it's a big number. It's bigger than the millennial generation. It's actually 24% of the population.
Wow.
And this particular generation is showing trends that are very different from what we have seen before. So whether you're a teacher, an educator like I am, or whether you are you're a CEO or a leader in any sort of business or organization, it behooves all of us to know something about this generation because the expectations are very different. So I can keep, do you want me to keep going and kind of give you like a little historical background of what this generation looks like?
Yeah, I think you shared with me a while back some stats of like never really known a world before 9/11 and some of the things like that, and it just blew my mind.
Yeah, it blew my mind when I heard it too. So if you think about, again, we're looking at 95 to 2012. Some people don't are defining Gen Z like even 2000, 2001. So that is true. The people that we're talking about were born for the most part after 9/11. So the world has always looked a particular way to them. The nation, at least the United States, has been at war since this group was born. So they've never known a time when there wasn't some kind of war. And it seems like it's never ending wars. Like you and I even had a conversation where like, wait a minute, are we in war or did that one end? Like it's difficult for us to even understand these very complicated sort of global issues. It's important to think about gun violence as well. Columbine was in 1999. And it's not that there weren't school shootings before Columbine, but Columbine is sort of that watershed moment where after that, it seemed that every single incident that we heard about, it was like a ramping up and they became more frequent. Or at least we felt like they were more frequent because of how it was reported. That's happening in 1999. So this is a group of people who have grown up with the threat of gun violence their entire life. Like they've never felt that school was a safe place. Their world in general is a little bit smaller than kids who came before them. And that is largely because the Gen Z kids, their parents are Gen Xers. They're my generation. And Gen X kids were latchkey kids and often felt sort of ignored. And in response to that, they've sort of overparented Gen Z. So it's like sort of a micro parenting that has happened, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but it's sort of a more protected generation in terms of how big the world feels. They're also digital natives. So they have never known a time when you couldn't get on the internet and get on the internet easily. Like this is not even like the dial-up generation, or at least most of them aren't. And for many of them, they are natives to social media. Like they have experienced social media as part of their growing up. They worry a lot about money because many of them were born after 2008. So they are aware of the economy crashing. And then let's just add in, they now have experienced a pandemic.
Yeah.
So in addition to all of these other things, they have experienced a world that the rest of us have also experienced by being alive, but during their extremely formative years. And one of the things that I think is particularly interesting about this generation is they crave stability because they live in a world that feels deeply, deeply unstable. And they're suspicious of institutions because they've been let down by every institution. Or they feel let down by every institution. So they're less likely to come into a classroom or a company and just sort of accept this is how things are going to be. They're much more likely to question, why are we doing things this way? Do we have to do things this way? Can we do things another way? And I actually think that's one of the most positive aspects of this generation is they're not afraid to disrupt. They're not afraid to say like, hey, we did that and didn't work very well. And the other thing that I think is interesting is this is the most diverse generation. 48% of Gen Z are non-white. So like almost 50% of them are not white and 62% of them think that increasing diversity is positive. So like more than half think that this is a good thing. This is a good direction the world is going in. They also have a lot of problems, a lot of issues that are new to this generation. And I can recognize what these things are because I feel them myself, and that is technology addiction.
Mm.
They are, I found some interesting numbers today, like 95% of teens have smartphones. So if you, I don't know your age, but I'm guessing that you're old enough that you did not have a smartphone as a kid.
No, it was like high school, I think, was when they first started. I'm 20, I was 93, so I'm 2 years away from being Gen Z, but it feels like light years. But
That
smart,
right?
yeah, iPhones didn't really exist until I think I was in 8th grade in high school. And then the first iPhone came out and it was, what is this thing? You know, I like my iPod Classic. Why do I need this touchscreen? But everyone wanted it.
Well, and even if you look at the, sort of first iPhones, we didn't have as much to do on them. I mean,
Oh,
like you, and I think, getting, like I'm thinking back to some of my first phones I have and just even thinking of like data plans. Like I was
yeah,
very conscious of, I don't have enough minutes for that, or,
exactly, exactly.
um, and which leads to so 45% of teens say that they are online constantly, meaning they never disconnect, um, as long as they're awake. So they are connected to their phones and connected to people on the other end of it in some way, always. They also tend to multitask more. So the average number of screens that a teenager interacts with at one time is 5 screens. So, like, you're scrolling through Instagram, you maybe have like Netflix going in the background. You may have like an iPad, you might be doing your homework in front of your computer. I mean, I definitely see this, and as we've made that shift to teaching via Zoom, I am shocked by how many times I see just completely like they just go off and they're like doing something else over here, and I don't see that as much in the classroom because I think it's easier to control yourself in the classroom. But I get it because I have found myself sitting in class going, I wonder if I should go shop for something on Amazon, like
Right.
in the middle of class. And I'm like, why am I having that thought? Well, it's because this technology is designed to be addictive, and they have been addicted to it since they were children. So this is a significantly different way of interacting with the world than you had, and you're actually very close to their age. And as a result of this constant connectivity, they don't interact with humans in person to the same extent. So even comparing to millennials, Gen Z kids spend on average about an hour less time per day communicating or interacting with people face to face. And that's pre-pandemic. I mean, obviously the pandemic changed, everything for everybody, but prior to that, they spent 1 hour per day less time face to face with, friends or other humans than millennials did. And because of that lack of kind of in-person interaction or connected interaction that's not through like Instagram or is not through texting, they feel very lonely
Mhm.
and they feel very disconnected, and they have really poor communication skills. And that's one of the things that they themselves are saying they need help with. They need to learn how to communicate better in person. Even though I think it's the millennials that sort of have been unfairly maligned as being like the unable and unwilling to interact in person. Millennials are actually more comfortable with it because they don't spend as much time online.
Mhm. So it sounds like what you just said, they are aware of some of these challenges that they're facing. They are desperate for help. Do you see that that's true?
Yes, yes. And again, I'm talking broad strokes. I mean, we can
Mhm.
always find people who don't fit this profile. But I definitely see disconnection and a need and a strong desire to connect with other people, which in terms of education, students want more small group work than ever before. I
Wow.
mean, 20 years ago, students didn't want to work on teams because and I think you and I have talked about this, like everyone's had that team experience where you ended up doing all the work and you're like, I never want to work on a team again.
Mhm.
Gen Z doesn't feel the same. It's not that they don't experience the same problems or that they don't face the same issues. It's just that it's much more novel to them to be able to work, um, in person and to actually have real connections with other people. And some of that like desire to connect with people is just like an incredible rise in mental illness. I mean, look, I was looking this up today about their I forgot to write this down, but in terms of mental illness, oh, here it is. Rates of depression, self-harm, and anxiety have doubled since 2007. And some of that is just that we have better language for mental health, and we talk about it more and we think about it more. But it's not totally bad. It's that there really is more anxiety and depression that's arising as a result of all of these things, including technology addiction.
Mm-hmm. How do you see that in the classroom, these areas of, you know, the challenges Gen Z faces with communicating and connecting face to face? I mean, we are living in a digital world right now with Zoom and virtual classes, but pre-pandemic, how did you see those shortcomings kind of play out? And did you see it with the way they interacted with you as a professor? Because when I was in college, I loved FaceTime with my I loved FaceTime with my professor. I loved utilizing office hours. And I'm just curious how you've seen that shift in the way they interact with each other and interact with you.
So I would say, and again, and I'll answer your question pre-pandemic, and what I assume we'll return to when we go back to somewhat more normal life, hopefully. Students in general require more time than like more. There's more Lizas. There's more people that want to come to office hours. There's more people that want more feedback, more coaching, more interaction. And I can see a difference that even 10 years ago, if I had open office hours, I would maybe get the same few people. It would be you, Liza. It would be you and a few people like you. Whereas now, I think almost every student is looking for that kind of connection and that kind of help. And a lot of the research about how to respond to Gen Z in higher ed really is about providing even more feedback more frequently so that students aren't feeling quite so alienated because they're anxious. And so, having long periods of time where they don't feel like they're connecting with me, or they feel like the only time they're connecting with me is in the classroom, is uncomfortable. They want more connection. And I think this is going to play out in the workplace too. I think this group of this generation is going to want more they're going to want more feedback from their supervisors. They want more feedback from their coworkers. They want more opportunities to learn and be better. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. I think it can be seen, like, I think you can spin it and make it negative and say like, oh, they're so dependent or they're so needy. But I really see it as a generation that is asking for help and saying, help me figure out how to be better and how to help others be better. And that is something that I'm definitely seeing playing out in the classroom. This generation really cares. It's not that other generations didn't care about the world, but this generation is much more vocal about wanting to make the world a better place. And so a lot of times what they're asking me are questions like, who can I be? What can I do with this? How can I help other people? Why does this matter? And they still care about money. I mean, they care about money a lot. Everybody does. But I think that there's more emphasis on meaning and purpose and contribution. And I can't help but think that that's a positive thing and that we should really embrace that. But it is going to require that for people who are like running the show, whether it's the professor or management, I think we're going to have to think of ways to incorporate a more human-centered workspace. I think the days of having people come to work and sort of like hammer out their little job and then go home, I think those are done. People don't want that kind of separation. They want to feel like their life everything is integrated and that who they are as a person is also reflected in who they are at work. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's an interesting balance between them wanting connection, kind of shying away from connection, but also wanting everything to be integrated. It's I don't see how do you see a way where it can all kind of in a perfect world play out nicely?
Well, I'm an optimist, right? I'm an idealist, and so I do think so. I read an article today. It was an article in Business Horizons, and I can share the article with you if you want to post it. It's called "Ditto for Gen Z: A Framework for Leveraging Uniqueness." And the authors of this piece of research are using Ditto, DITTO, as an acronym. And they say Ditto stands for the things that Gen Z is going to require in the workplace. And so these are the things that Ditto stands for. So diversity, individualism, teamwork, technology, and organizational support. And some of these things are kind of at odds with each other. So they're looking at research. These researchers are looking at research that says that Gen Z is more individualistic, that they're more self-centered, more focused on themselves, but they also like teamwork. So I think there are these kinds of, I suppose it's true of sort of any person, that we have these things that seem to be at odds with each other. And I think it's going to be about finding the right balance of helping individuals maximize um, themselves and what they hope to do and what they hope to be, but also creating this collaborative environment that allows people to help each other to do that. So I mean, I think that those things can coexist, but it is going to be a challenge to think about what that looks like. And also, I just want to say, like, as kind of a footnote, I think every like old people generation, and I'm talking about my own here, but also the ones before me, like every generation thinks that the kids are going to ruin everything. I mean, like, go all the way back to Plato, and Plato was all upset about the written word because then nobody would memorize anything anymore. And the technology of the scroll was just a bridge too far. I think every generation worries that the next one won't be able to adapt. I think some of these things are just a matter of like maturity. Like, we all get better at these things. That said, I still think that this is a generation that is going to demand more, but ultimately what they're demanding seem to me to be good things. I mean, a generation that demands diversity and that demands organizational support and that demands ways to maximize your individual potential, but also that allows for productive collaboration and teamwork. Like, those are good things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. So if you were a boss in corporate America, wherever, you're hiring some fresh out of college uh, young professionals, what are a few things that you would love to know when working with Gen Z? Let's say you have no experience working with the generation. What are a few things that you wish someone would tell you before you start to interact and work with them and learn their nuances and just get to know them?
That's an excellent question. I have to kind of think here for a second. Well, I'll answer that by telling you some things that I have discovered in the classroom that I think then could be applied to the workplace. So one of the things that I learned in the initial training that I went through at Westminster about Gen Z is that this is a generation that feels like they must be perfect at all times. And they're not very good at failure because they haven't had a lot of opportunities to practice failure. And some of that comes from parenting, like shifting parenting styles, like that kind of micro parenting that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it just comes from lack of exposure. Just, when you live your life on Instagram, where, everything is sort of fake and filtered, it can become very difficult to adapt to a world where, sometimes you get a D on a paper. And one of the ways that higher ed is responding to that is by taking stock of things that we've done for like 1,000 years that we did just because we did it. So, for example, we are moving toward, at least at Westminster anyway, doing like smaller assessments, like more frequent quizzes, more frequent like papers with more feedback, and getting rid of this idea of like, there's just a final exam at the end and you either succeed or you don't succeed, because this generation has been tested to death. This is the No Child Left Behind generation. And so they have spent a ton of their education prepping for some sort of exam that then gives them a result that is supposed to define them. And you're just young enough that you're part of that too, I think. And so I think that for like, if somebody is coming into the workplace, I think managers, leaders need to know that it's not that this generation isn't willing to work. It's just that they're not great at big like stakes. Like give them smaller stakes with more feedback. And I don't think that that means dumbing it down or, you know, like giving a trophy to everybody. It simply means recognizing that this group, because of the things that they have faced and because of these generational challenges, they just like they do things differently. And like that sort of more frequent interaction is how they work and respond better. This generation also prefers a lot of flexibility. And I think, when I say flexibility, I don't mean like, you know, like they can choose to do like the job that you're giving them or not. But if I'm giving students an assignment, like I don't necessarily care how they go about it. Like if I'm telling them what it is, that the reason that we're doing this and what the outcomes should be, there's lots of ways to get to that. And there's no reason why they can't have choices with that. And I think the same thing is true in workspaces. Like, they don't necessarily get to choose everything that they do, nor that's just not reasonable. None of us do. I mean, there's lots of things at my job I don't want to do, but I do have a lot of flexibility about how I do them. And I think with Gen Z, they are thinking in terms of flexibility, even like, can I work from home half the time? Like, can I work, you know, like, can I go take a walk? And I think that there is this sense among older people. And again, I'm like talking about me and older than me, who think like, if you're not sitting at your desk, you're not working. And this generation they don't play that way.
Wow. So interesting. I'm like listening to you talk and I'm like, am I Gen Z? I'm like, I think I was just right on the cusp that I'm like, I can relate to the, like you said, the over testing or the, that really stuck out to me, that we have been prepped our whole lives for a grade to define our worth. And man, I can see the way that that has affected me, and certain grades and memories that has affected me or that has stuck with me. So I think that's really interesting. One of my final questions as we are wrapping up is, what is your favorite thing about Gen Z?
Ooh, that's such a good question.
Or one of your favorite things about Gen Z?
Yeah. So I
Or,
want to.
or what is one thing you admire about Gen Z? Those could be hand in hand, but
That's a good way of phrasing it. I'm trying to think generationally and not individually. Because if I think about my individual students, I can tell you all kinds of things that I admire or, you know, I'm impressed with about them individually. So I'm trying to think of sort of generationally. Um, and I think that one of the things that I really admire about this generation is their willingness and openness about talking about mental health. I mean, as someone who, as someone who has not felt comfortable talking about mental health most of my life and who has not talked about it in like for years. I mean, only like my closest people know about some of what I consider like very private aspects of just how I approach the world and about like specific mental health challenges that I've had. The fact that my students can talk about it and recognize that these are important aspects of like people as wholes, as holistic human beings, that includes talking about the way that they like have faced challenges with depression, or you know, they're much more likely to tell me what their needs are. I guess that's probably a simpler way of saying it. Like, I had a student last semester who just blew my mind because she wrote me, and this was an undergrad, so I would guess she was probably 19. She wrote me an email and said, I'm not going to be in class today because I have had so much anxiety lately and I haven't been sleeping, and sort of listed off all of these like sort of issues that she'd been having. A lot of it was related to the pandemic. And she just straight up told me, like, I'm not coming to class because I would rather sleep. And I feel that that's more important for my health. And she was willing to accept the consequences for that. She's like, I understand I'm not going to be in class, so I'm taking a miss and I need to make that up. But this is what's right for me right now. And I was shocked because I don't know that I could say that now.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that the way they do that really does us other generations wonders of like tearing down walls and allowing us to be vulnerable as well. That's really special.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it, is that it kind of opens the doors for everybody. And
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, like you can go too far. I mean, I've also had students who have said, like, I'm taking a self-care day and going to get a manicure or whatever. And I think that that kind of talk about self-care can oftentimes be not particularly deep and not particularly useful. But
Mhm.
when people are willing to say, like, I have to make choices about my life and about what's best for me, and sometimes that means being very honest of like, I actually need to take this time. And when I think about how that plays out in the workplace, I can't help but think it's only positive to have people who are willing to say, hey, I get it. I've got this job to do and I will get it done, but I can't do it tomorrow. And here's why. Like,
Mhm.
those are good skills. I mean, if I feel like so much of my life, I have ignored my own kind of like physical and emotional needs. And has that really made me like a better person? Has it really made, or has it just burned me out? And I think that the answer here is maybe that we all need to learn to be a little bit more honest about what our needs are.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. My goodness, I feel like we could talk about this for forever, and it's something that people, older generations especially, are probably craving to know. I feel like there is a little bit of fear with Gen Z. People are like, what is this creature in a zoo? Like they are just so vastly different. And so I think this is just such gold that deserves, a lot more conversation and attention. So as we wrap up, a couple things. One of my favorite podcasts ever is The Table Group by Patrick Lencioni at the Table. He does all things internal communication, organizational health. At least the early episodes, I'm not sure about the late ones, are not sponsored, but they love to do kind of fake sponsorships, and I think it's hilarious. So I'm going to choose two things I would like to sponsor, and Christy, I want you to do the same. It doesn't have to be two; it can just be one. You can follow my lead. So I would like to uh, sponsor Pilot G2 pens. I refuse to use another pen because I think they are so amazing. There's just nothing like them, rollerball pens, these gel ink pens. Don't give me a ballpoint pen. I will like chuck it across the room. And I started with the size 10. I've worked all the way down to 0.38. I'm back around a 5 to 7 range of the Pilot G2, black only. Big fan of the Pilot G2. The second thing I'd like to sponsor are pears. I think they are vastly underrated fruit. I mean, you've got probably more than three different variations of pears. One's like an apple, one is a little more soft, one is kind of bougie and goes on charcuterie. So I just want to thank pears for just doing what they do best. And so that's what I'm sponsoring. I really put you on the spot with this. I didn't prepare you for this. So
That
to
is true. And I feel like I have big shoes to step into here because I love all like pen talk. Like I could talk about pens and think about pens and shop for pens and like look at my pens all day long. And I love pears. So I feel like
you
we
can
have
echo my
in common.
sponsorship.
Yeah, you sold me. You totally sold me. So I so my first one is going to be I want to sponsor libraries. So
Mm.
one of the things that I didn't mention is that the average Gen Z person has an attention span of, do you want to take a guess?
Well, I know a goldfish is 3 seconds, and I don't want to like compare them to a goldfish, but I would say less than 10 just because I'm pessimistic.
Yeah, you're right. It's 8 seconds.
Mm.
So more than a goldfish, but less than is needed to do absolutely anything. So, and this is like non-judgmental on my part, because I noticed that I have eroded my attention span by all the time that I spend online. And I get off of like Instagram and I'm like, what in the world did I just do for the last hour? Like I've gone in, like I'm in a time warp and I've lost it. So I just recently wrote an article about the importance of reading and all of the things that reading can do. And I'm convinced that reading is the ultimate brain hack, because it forces you to build that focus muscle. And there's a lot of really good research that suggests that that's what happens. So I want to just endorse libraries. I mean, how amazing is it that a building exists that is there for you to literally take stuff out of that makes you a better human being? And with the pandemic, special shout out to the Salt Lake County Library, who has incredibly improved their online digital collection. So like you can sit in your pajamas and get books on your Kindle and improve your attention span so that you are smarter than a goldfish. And then my second one is I just want to sponsor popcorn in general, because I just don't think there's ever a time when you wouldn't want popcorn.
That was my third sponsorship, was going to be popcorn, all the kind, cheddar,
all the kinds. Yeah,
butter. Okay, that's
yep.
amazing. All right, Christy, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Before we go, where can listeners or viewers find you at? Take your little plug and run with it.
Sure. Okay. So I blog occasionally at my blog. I usually blog about books. Sometimes I blog about popcorn, and that's at ladyprofessorreads.com. And my portfolio is also there. You can find a link to all of my books and to all of my articles. As I said, my most recent one was for Harvard Business Review about the importance of reading. And I specifically talked about a little experiment I did on my MSc students last semester, where I had them reading fiction to see how it changed their perception of some of the topics we were talking about. And that is linked on my website as well. And then, of course, if anyone wants to contact me, you can always do that through either my website or Westminster, and it's cseifert@westminstercollege.com. Oh, and I'm on Twitter at Mean Christy.
Mean Christy?
Mean Christy, yeah. It's an inside joke. I couldn't find a handle that wasn't taken, and one of the jokes around my house is that like I don't have it in me to be mean. And so that it's like a joke that my husband sometimes calls me Mean Christy, because I can't be mean. If I'm being mean, it might be like I might say something in my head and then feel guilty about it for weeks on end. So it's an ironic handle.
That's why I questioned it. I was like, mean? Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you for not saying, oh, well, that makes total sense.
On brand. Well, thank you so much, Christy. This is super enlightening. And yeah, I think what you have to share is super valuable. And I hope people can just take away a lot of empathy, understanding, and more of appreciation for our new upcoming generation of really the next leaders. So thank you, Christy.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Yeah. All right. And cut. I don't have like a pew, 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 pew.
That's pretty good. Why don't you use that?